Distinguished members of Congress, I stand before you today with evidence that Stacey Abrams has orchestrated the largest theft of taxpayer dollars in modern American history. The words ricocheted through the grand hearing room like a cannon blast. Photographers craned forward, capturing the fury etched into Senator John Kennedy's face. He held a stack of documents aloft in his right hand, the pages crinkled from a rushed assembly of evidence. The atmosphere was electric. Staffers shuffled closer, forgetting their usual practiced composure. Journalists perched on the edge of their seats, pens poised like daggers, ready to record every syllable that promised to blow open a scandal of staggering proportions. Kennedy inhaled sharply and drove his point home in a measured but unyielding tone. Citizens of this great nation, he continued, voice laced with controlled outrage, count on us to safeguard their hard-earned tax dollars. But if these documents are any indication, Miss Abrams has funneled billions into a clandestine network of nonprofits, mere shells designed to launder the public's money. He slammed the stack onto the oak table. The resounding smack drew a collective gasp from onlookers and officials alike. The echo lingered, punctuating the heavy silence that now enshrouded the room. As the reverberation subsided, speculation surged in its place. Could such an astounding claim be true? And if it was, what seismic fallout would it trigger across the political landscape? Cradling the documents in his hands, Kennedy slowly turned to the committee members who looked as though they'd witnessed an earthquake. No one, it seemed, could tear their eyes away from the startling evidence, though few had any clue what it might hold. "Mark my words," he declared, voice low and steeled with determination. "This is more than a mere oversight or a line-item discrepancy. This is a calculated betrayal of public trust, one that shakes the very foundation of this institution." The senator's gaze swept the packed chamber, lingering on an empty seat near the center aisle, one reserved for Stacey Abrams. She had yet to arrive, but her presence was palpably felt, as if the specter of her alleged crimes loomed over every mind. The tension in the room grew even thicker, as though any second it would explode into heated confrontation or stunned realization. And so it began. With a thunderous opening salvo, Senator Kennedy had thrown down the gauntlet, accusing a prominent political figure of what could be the most audacious act of graft in decades. Outside the hearing room, dozens of cameras and hundreds of onlookers waited with bated breath, oblivious to the drama unfolding inside. For those present, however, there was no doubt Congress had just been rocked by a bombshell, and there would be no turning back. The air in the hearing room felt thin, as though everyone present had forgotten how to breathe. Just as Senator Kennedy finished his thunderous accusation, the doors at the rear of the chamber swung open, revealing Stacey Abrams. She strode in calmly, her chin raised in quiet defiance, the faint clicking of her heels echoing like a countdown to the clash that everyone knew was coming. There was a charged pause. Then, with a slight nod to the chairperson, Abrams settled into her seat. She turned toward Kennedy, locking eyes with him, her own expression a mixture of steel resolve and disbelief. All cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of emotion that danced across her face. Kennedy wasted no time. Rising from his seat, he leaned forward, gripping the edge of the committee table so tightly the veins in his hands stood out. "Madam Abrams," he began, voice echoing through the amplified speakers, "I have laid out a bombshell of a charge. And you walk in here like you haven't got a care in the world. Did you think we wouldn't catch on? Did you assume no one would notice billions of taxpayer dollars evaporating into thin air?" Abrams arched an eyebrow, flipping open a slim folder in front of her. "With all due respect, Senator," she replied in a measured tone, "your accusations are beyond outrageous. If you have so-called evidence, present it. Let's see it for ourselves. Because until I see proof, I won't stand for these unfounded claims." A wave of uneasy whispers rippled through the spectators and committee members alike. Sensing the tension, the chairperson cleared her throat. "We will maintain decorum in this hearing. Senator Kennedy, you will present any material evidence in an orderly fashion." But Kennedy, visibly charged, pounded a clenched fist on the table. "Orderly fashion?" he shot back, voice shaking with anger. "I'd like to know how one orderly explains a labyrinth of shell organizations that appear and vanish within weeks. How does one orderly rationalize checks from these phony nonprofits made out to affiliates of Ms. Abrams's campaign?" With each question, he pointed a trembling finger at the documents he'd brought, daring anyone to challenge their authenticity. Abrams's gaze darkened, and though she kept her composure, she leaned closer to the microphone, her own voice rising. "I will not be judged by your theatrics, Senator. And I certainly won't be strong-armed by a grandstand. You accuse me of stealing billions. Billions? Do you realize the gravity of that claim? That's enough money to shatter public trust, to sink entire governments. Are you so blinded by partisanship that you'd risk sowing doubt in our democracy just to slander my name? Kennedy's face reddened, and for a moment, it seemed as if a storm might break out right there. Between them, the tension crackled like static electricity. Several committee members exchanged uncertain glances, unsure whether to intervene or let the confrontation continue. Across the room, journalists scribbled furiously. The spectacle, after all, was the story of a lifetime. I demand answers, Kennedy pressed, glaring daggers. You waltz in here pretending your hands are clean, but the paper trail speaks otherwise. If you have nothing to hide, then why have so many of these shady nonprofits tied to your campaign disappeared without a trace? Abrams straightened in her chair, her voice low and tight. I have never, let me repeat, never taken a single cent that wasn't accounted for. I'm here voluntarily, determined to refute these accusations head-on. And if you have any real proof, Senator, you should be turning it over to the authorities right now, not flaunting it for political theatrics. For a split second, the room fell silent. Even the constant hum of cameras seemed to hold its breath. This was the moment that would define the confrontation. Two titans staring each other down, each refusing to bend. Onlookers felt the weight of a nation watching, the real-time drama unfolding live on screens across the country. Eventually, the chairperson tapped the gavel lightly, cutting the silence. We will have order, she insisted, voice strained with urgency. Senator Kennedy, Ms. Abrams, this hearing intends to investigate these allegations with full transparency. Both of you will have your time to present evidence. But make no mistake, she added, glancing at the cameras, this is not a trial of character. It is an inquiry of facts. Yet it was clear to everyone, facts alone might not settle the storm. The seething feud, the personal affronts, the looming possibility of a colossal political scandal, all of it coalesced into a singularly potent drama. And in that vortex of anger and denial, neither Kennedy nor Abrams seemed ready to yield an inch. A taut stillness held the chamber in its grip as the chairperson signaled for the hearing to proceed. No one dared break the hush, not after the verbal sparring between Senator Kennedy and Stacey Abrams had sent the tension through the roof. Then, with a swift motion, a junior aide to the Oversight Committee approached the witness table, placing a stack of manila folders before both Kennedy and Abrams. Madam Chair, the aide announced, voice quavering slightly, the documents we just obtained might shed more light on the nonprofits in question. All eyes locked on those unassuming beige folders. If the rumors whispered through Capitol corridors were correct, they contained a fresh wave of incriminating and possibly exonerating evidence that had materialized overnight. Senator Kennedy's hands trembled as he opened the top folder. Inside were screenshots of financial statements, receipts, and bank wires, many bearing the names of organizations with vague, almost generic titles. A hush fell over the spectators. Even Abrams, who had maintained an air of calm defiance, tensed for a moment as she flipped through her own copy. Kennedy found his voice first. These transactions, he began, words clipped with urgency, are supposed to belong to nonprofit groups that promote civic engagement. But as you can see in these ledgers, he held up a particularly damning sheet. The sums being transferred out far exceed any legitimate expense. Where is all that extra money going? A stir of alarm swept the committee as everyone scoured the pages in front of them. The columns of figures were staggering. Transfers in the millions, sometimes tens of millions, sent to account numbers that vanished or reappeared under different legal entities. It was a Byzantine maze of shifting identities and shadowy recipients. Abrams leaned toward a microphone, pressing a fingertip on one line of text. Senator, you're selectively highlighting numbers without context. Nonprofits handle donations, grants, and various pooled resources. It's not unusual for money to move in large amounts, especially when these organizations are national in scope. Yet her measured explanation didn't quell the atmosphere of mounting suspicion. A senator from across the aisle chimed in, eyes narrowed at the newly revealed evidence. Ms. Abrams, if there's nothing to hide, how do you account for the sudden dissolution of these nonprofits right after they received such massive sums? His finger traced the timeline printed at the bottom of one sheet. Within weeks, they folded, and the funds, well, they vanished. Before Abrams could answer, Kennedy jumped in, voice resonating with barely concealed triumph. Exactly. These nonprofits sprang up like mushrooms after a rainstorm, and then dissolved just as quickly. That's money laundering, pure and simple. Or do you have another explanation, Ms. Abrams? Abrams's jaw tightened. I can't speak for every organization's leadership, but I suspect you're ignoring that many nonprofits faced financial strain during recent economic downturns. Grant fund evaporated, donors pulled out, these things happen. She paused, scanning a particular paragraph, brow furrowing. However, she continued, voice gaining a sharper edge, I do see unusual activity tied to certain groups, and I'm just as concerned as you are about where the money ultimately went. But linking these to me, Senator, just because some tangential figure might have donated to one of my campaigns, is a stretch, if not an outright smear. A ripple of surprise moved through the room. Abrams wasn't denying suspicious money flows. She was effectively calling for them to be scrutinized, just not pinned on her. It was a deft pivot. Members of the committee exchanged uncertain looks as they digested the possibility that truth might be more complicated than a single, damning narrative. Suddenly, the junior aide raised a hand. Madam Chair, I have another set of records that arrived just minutes ago. The aide hurried to distribute new folders, each labeled urgent, restricted. The energy in the room spiked further as pages were swiftly examined. This second trove appeared to detail emails among various board members of the nonprofits in question. Some messages referenced direct communications with political operatives, one name, in particular, repeated with startling frequency. The tension in the room ratcheted higher with every flick of a page. A hush came over the crowd again. If these emails truly linked the nonprofit's dealings to well-known political figures, Abrams included, it could be the smoking gun Kennedy had been waiting for. Or it might prove that her involvement was, at best, peripheral. Every camera lens zoomed in on Abrams, waiting for a hint of panic or guilt. But her stare didn't waver. She scanned the emails line by line, finally looking up with an air of steeled indignation. I have no affiliation with these board members, nor any recollection of such communications, she insisted. This is guilt by association, at best. Kennedy, pulse pounding, braced for another volley of questions. So you're saying, he pressed, that these individuals, some of whom made major contributions to your campaigns, never coordinated these nonprofits' finances with your knowledge? Abrams exhaled, lifting her copy of the restricted emails. If there's correspondence in here suggesting I knew about these activities, I'd like you to point it out. Show me the single thread that ties me directly to these alleged thefts. Because I see none. Her challenge hung in the air like the last riddle of a puzzle box. For a moment, the swirling pages and breathless accusations paused, leaving the entire hearing room in a precarious limbo. The grand unveiling of shadowy financial statements had indeed shaken Congress, but had it truly nailed anyone to the wall, or simply hurled everyone into deeper uncertainty? Despite the flood of fresh evidence, no one could say with confidence who was telling the truth. The only certainty was that this confrontation had escalated into a high-stakes battle for credibility, every new document tightening the jaws of suspicion around the Capitol. And still, an unshakable question hovered. Were these revelations the hammer that would finally fall on Abrams, or just another twist in an ever-deepening mystery? A murmur of hushed voices overtook the hearing room, like the distant rumble of thunder before a storm. The mass of documents and contradicting numbers sprawled across every desk had driven the tension to a boiling point. Media lenses zoomed in on Stacey Abrams, who now sat poised with her own folder of counter-evidence, calmly flipping through pages as though methodically preparing for battle. Senator Kennedy, gripping the edge of his chair, aimed a pointed glare at Abrams. So he challenged, "You're looking at those files like there's something new. Yet you've had every opportunity to dispute these accusations. I find it strange you're only now producing the so-called proof." Abrams stood, ignoring the barb, and walked over to the council's table. She placed her folder before the chairperson with a decisive thud. "I know you're all scanning line after line of suspicious transactions, but you're only seeing one side of the ledger. It's time Congress sees all the records, not just the cherry-picked data meant to incriminate me." A stunned hush fell, and even Kennedy paused. Across from him, Abrams was distributing color-coded spreadsheets, scanned memos, and signed affidavits to each of the committee members. Expressions quickly shifted from skepticism to surprise as they flipped through Abrams's carefully prepared exhibits. One of these key nonprofits, for example, Abrams continued in a crisp voice, received large sums from various donors, true. "But you'll see here," she tapped a spreadsheet column, "these funds were legally allocated for voter registration drives in underserved communities. Then, once that project ended, the organization was dissolved, as many temporary nonprofits are. Her explanation hung in the air, and at least a few committee members nodded thoughtfully. Everyone had already been primed to believe they were dealing with a labyrinth of illegal money laundering. Now, Abrams was hinting at a simpler and entirely lawful explanation. Kennedy's eyes narrowed. What about the shell accounts that spring up in these documents? Are you saying they don't exist? Abrams tilted her head, unwavering in her gaze. Oh, they exist. But they're not my responsibility. These are accounts tied to affiliates or donor networks, people who, yes, may have donated to me, but that doesn't hand me the keys to their finances. I can't control how they allocate funds. If there's wrongdoing here, then let's investigate it properly. But do not pin it on me without direct proof. A restless shuffle moved through the senators and representatives. One of them, previously quiet, leaned forward. You're acknowledging that potentially shady transactions might have taken place, but you maintain you had no involvement, no benefit from these nonprofit activities? That you had no knowledge, no contact with their boards? Abrams's voice rang out, firm and unyielding. That is correct. I dealt with many organizations during my political career, but legitimate partnerships and endorsements are not tantamount to collusion. She turned a page in her file, pointing to a bulleted list. Here are timelines, board rosters, and budget breakdowns that show legitimate disbursements for voter outreach, educational seminars, and other community initiatives. If money was siphoned off afterward, I wanted investigated as much as anyone else. She looked straight at Kennedy. Senator, I challenge you to find a single direct piece of evidence linking my campaign or me personally to these shell accounts. You won't find it because it doesn't exist. An electrifying charge crackled through the room. Reporters furiously typed notes, capturing Abrams's bold stance for headlines that would soon flood the internet and TV broadcast alike. In this moment, her defiance radiated a kind of moral indignation. She didn't appear panicked, as one might expect of someone cornered. Instead, she seemed emboldened, like a fighter who had finally thrown off the ropes. Kennedy, for his part, struggled to hide his frustration. He rifled through his own folders, searching for a knockout punch, for that one piece of evidence that would definitively link Abrams to the staggering financial scandal. But each time, his gaze returned to Abrams's meticulously documented audits and third-party verifications. There was no obvious smoking gun that could disprove her version of events. A ripple of uncertainty spread among the committee members. It was a stark turn from the earlier momentum, which had largely sided with Kennedy's claims. They stared intently at Abrams's new evidence, trying to piece together the baffling question. Was she the mastermind of a massive money laundering scheme, or a leader who'd naively partnered with questionable organizations? Abrams, sensing the shift in atmosphere, reclaimed her seat. She surveyed the panel, her voice softer yet resolute. The stakes here are monumental, for my reputation, for the trust people place in this institution, and for every taxpayer in the country. If there's corruption, let us root it out. But do not make me a scapegoat for crimes I did not commit. The gavel rapped lightly, breaking the tension. We will continue reviewing these documents, the chairperson announced, voice subdued. Both Senator Kennedy's evidence and Ms. Abrams's records will be examined by our independent auditors. We will reconvene once we have a clearer understanding. For the first time since the hearing started, no one spoke out of turn. The session was suspended, leaving a chamber awash in anxious whispers. As Abrams gathered her papers, her shoulders seemed set, her eyes full of unshakable resolve. If Senator Kennedy had hoped she'd fold under the weight of scandal, it was now clear she had no intention of backing down. In the sprawling marble halls of Capitol Hill, the tension had reached a fever pitch. All through the night, news outlets buzzed with speculation about who was truly at fault. Was Senator Kennedy justified in his grave accusations, or was Stacey Abrams, as she fervently claimed, an unwitting target of political sabotage? Whispers of an imminent reckoning drifted among staffers, reporters, and the American public alike. At dawn, another extraordinary session reconvened. A hush enveloped the hearing room as committee members filed in, wearing fatigue like a mantle. Document after document had been pored over, shadows of doubt cast on every page. Even the most vocal among them appeared deeply unsettled, not just by the volume of new evidence, but by its contradictory nature. Abrams waited calmly at the witness table, stacks of neatly bound material at her side. Not far behind, Senator Kennedy clutched a pen as though it were a lifeline, scribbling last-minute notes before the chairperson officially opened the floor. Across the aisle, aides exchanged worried looks, struggling to predict the morning's outcome. The chairperson's gavel finally tapped. "We have reviewed both sets of documents in the intervening hours," she announced in a voice that wavered slightly. "The volume and complexity of these materials are, to put it plainly, staggering." She paused, glancing at Abrams, then at Kennedy. "While certain anomalies in the nonprofit's finances remain unexplained, our preliminary audit has found no direct evidence tying Ms. Abrams's personal campaign accounts to these suspicious transfers." A quiet gasp rippled through the chamber. Kennedy's face tightened. Abrams let a measured exhale slip through her lips, though her posture stayed rigid and alert. The chairperson continued, "However, it's equally true that the nonprofit's documents reveal a pattern of large, rapid financial transactions that could indicate, though not conclusively, money laundering at an organizational level. To determine whether Ms. Abrams or any specific individual orchestrated these flows will require deeper, more specialized investigation." A heavy silence landed on the room. After days of verbal skirmishes and revelations, it seemed no definitive blow had been dealt to either side. For a moment, a paralyzing uncertainty took hold. Finally, a senator near the end of the dais, who had sat mostly silent until then, cleared his throat. "In all my years on this committee," he said, voice unsteady with raw candor, "I have never seen such a dizzying puzzle of conflicting statements and counterstatements. One moment, it looks as though Ms. Abrams is implicated in a heinous financial scheme. The next, her evidence calls everything into question. Then, fresh data arrives, only to create more confusion." He turned to the rest of the committee. "I don't know who to believe anymore." At this, the room fell into a stunned lull. The stark admission from a seasoned senator struck everyone at once. All the usual political jockeying and impassioned arguments had led here an impasse. Spectators, journalists, even the aides lining the walls exchanged uncertain glances. For the first time in recent memory, Congress itself appeared at a total loss, speechless in the face of an intricate scandal where facts seemed to fold in upon themselves. Kennedy pressed his lips together, visibly struggling with the weight of that admission. Abrams clasped her hands, eyes drifting momentarily toward the ceiling, as if searching for the right words. Neither spoke. The stillness of the moment was overwhelming, broken only by the faint hum of the overhead lights. "Given our findings," the chairperson finally said, voice soft but resolute, "and in light of the conflicting nature of all presented evidence, this committee will recommend an independent counsel be appointed to investigate further. Until such time, we cannot offer definitive conclusions." Another wave of disbelief fluttered through the spectators. Reporters typed rapidly, capturing the news that an independent investigation, one free from the potential biases of either political party, would now take center stage. This meant more testimony, more forensic accounting, and possibly more explosive revelations. Abrams rose first, her expression a tightly controlled blend of relief and frustration. From across the chamber, Kennedy met her gaze, his stare still hard, but tinged now with the uncertainty he shared with all who had witnessed this volatile hearing. As the session formally adjourned, the gavel's echo dissolved into a subdued hum of whispered conversations. Cameras flashed, onlookers pressed in, trying to glean scraps of clarity from the unresolved tension. But clarity was in short supply. In that final moment, the gravity of it all settled like a fog, a scandal of staggering potential, towering reputations at stake, and an institution left without the answers it so desperately sought. In the corridor outside, as reporters clamored for statements, a single question seemed to linger in the charged air. Was this the day an alleged political titan had slipped the noose of accountability, or merely the opening act in a drama that would shake the very foundation of American governance?